So I'm Cathy Prudhomme, and I am the National Firewise USA Program Manager, and I've been with NFPA for about 5.5 years, and I'm located in their Denver, Colorado field office. So the Firewise USA program recently went through a name change, so many of you probably previously relate to us as Firewise Communities, but through an outreach project that we did last year in 6 cities, we dropped the communities part of our name because as we worked with stakeholders, they thought the community's name said you had to be part of an HOA or a very more formal community, and that smaller neighborhoods or rural areas weren't able to participate. So to get rid of that confusion, we got rid of the name communities and just took on Firewise USA. And our snapshot as of this morning, we are at 1,442 active communities throughout 42 states, and we work through the U.S. Forest Service with a cooperative agreement where NFPA contributes $1 for the program for every $1 that the U.S. Forest Service puts in, and we partner with the National Association of State Foresters. So the next slide. So Firewise is really a framework for residents to organize and collaborate on reducing their wildfire risk at that individual parcel level and throughout their neighborhood or their community, however they see that environment with which they live in. And it's where residents own their program's activities, and the national program provides a structure for them to work within that has an annual renewal requirement to remain in good standing every year. And then the steps to becoming a recognized participant include working with their designated state liaison and their staff. So that person typically is part of that state's forestry agency. It's a little different in CAL FIRE. That comes through CAL FIRE, but maybe in some states it's through the Department of Natural Resources. It just depends, but those are typically who the state liaison is. So the next slide. The steps to becoming a recognized participant includes completing a risk assessment for those individuals that are applying to be part of the program. In some states, they have that be their CWPP. In other states, they ask that to be more on the community level. So the state liaison determines what type of risk assessment they're going to require when participants become part of the program. So that's up to them to determine, and I have to, my computer just dropped to the screen, so let me see what slide we're at. So after the risk assessment, Wendy, if you want to go to the next slide, we ask them to form a Firewise board or committee in their group of participants, and typically that's resident-led, and they might invite their local fire district to be on their board. They might invite somebody from emergency management, any of those entities that they work within to help them as they decide what their priorities are on doing their risk reduction projects. And then that board will develop an action plan, if you want to go to the next slide, Wendy. And that action plan looks at that risk assessment and determines the things that they want to communicate to the participating residents that they want to pursue every year in being part of their risk reduction activities. So next slide. The next requirement is that every year they have to do some type of community educational activity, and that varies. Our participants have been in the program anywhere from a few months to going on their 16th year. Initially, the program started with a dozen pilot sites, and of those dozen sites, we have 9 that are still participating from way back in '02, and a lot of them have gone through a full cycle of their different educational activities and how they do their outreach. And some now, for this point in their evolution, are working on evacuation planning and doing evacuation drills. They're working on helping residents that might be disabled or elderly to do the mitigation around their homes. So what that activity consists of every year varies depending on where they are in their cycle of participation. And the next slide. Another requirement to initially become a Firewise site, and then every year when they renew their participation, is they have to invest a minimum of $2 per capita for their residents in risk reduction activities. So typically a community will just use 100 for simple math, would be they would have to invest $200 in mitigation activities, and they can reach that very quickly because the residents can put towards reaching that goal an hour of their time working at their individual property gets calculated at what the national volunteer rate is, and for 2017 that's $24.14 an hour. So that'd be really easy for them to meet that. But we have communities that maybe their required per capita investment might be $200, but they might realistically invest more than $200,000 in their mitigation investments. So we see people who tend to do a little bit on the lower end, and then those who exceed it greatly. So the next slide. Once they've completed all of those different pieces, they commit to completing an application. And then that application goes to their state's liaison for approval, and that liaison will review everything the community has done, and if they've done them, that they are initially received into the program and they become a recognized site. So the next slide. And the annual renewal requirements that they have to complete every year to retain their in good standing active status is required every calendar year. They give us that information by November 15th, and this year is the first time that the state liaisons, we have just spent a lot of money in developing a new portal where state liaisons can go in and they can review all of the activities those individual communities have completed in that year, and then they approve that renewal or they will delegate that approval back to NFPA. So those are basically the pieces of the program. Obviously, it's much more involved, and we'll come and do a full-day workshop on becoming a Firewise site and the benefits to that. We really focus on working around the individual home and working the three pieces of the home ignition zone and then doing those collaborative projects with their neighbors when they do their individual days. So if you have any information, please feel free to reach out to me here at NFPA. We offer free resources and materials, a monthly electronic newsletter. This year we're doing a wildfire research fact sheet in collaboration with IBHS, and we're in the third month of the 5-part series. And those are pieces where you can add your individual logos to it, whether a fire department or a forestry agency, and make those a piece that you distribute to residents. The first parts of the series, the first one we did this year was on roofing. The second one was on attic and crawl space fence, and the one we just released was on decks. And the next two issues, Dr. Steve Quarles is telling us that one is going to be on fences and one on coatings. So look for those to come up. And thanks for letting us share some information today.